Russian President Vladimir Putin already has enough on his plate. His special military operation in Ukraine has gone so catastrophically wrong that what should have been a 3-day war is on the verge of entering its 3rd year. He's lost so many soldiers to the brave Ukrainian resistance that he's being forced to rely on North Korea for help. Over 10,000 North Korean soldiers are set to enter the Kursk Oblast to fight against Ukraine in a move that puts Putin in North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's pocket. And while he's dealing with all of that, Putin has another problem on his hands: a blood feud within the Russian Federation. This feud is so catastrophic for Putin that it may lead to the collapse of the empire he's so desperately trying to build to secure his legacy. And why? Because it's a Chechen warlord who's instigated the feud, a Putin ally who's lit a tinderbox that could result in several countries under Russian control tearing themselves apart as the carefully created and Russian-favoring Chechen power structure collapses. But what does all of this mean for Putin and his grand plans of building an empire that restores Russia to the glory days of the Soviet era? How has he ended up embroiled in the terrible consequences of a blood feud? And does all this mean that Chechnya, so long a Russian-controlled territory, is finally falling out of his grasp? We answer all those questions in this video, but first we need to explore the context behind the blood feud and explain Russia's complicated history with Chechnya. According to the BBC, it all started in 1858. That's when Russia, after facing down decades of violent resistance from ethnic Chechens, finally managed to conquer Chechnya. Imam Shamil and his Islamic fighters fell, and Chechnya began the first of several periods under Russian rule. Fast forward to 1922, and Russia had transformed into the Soviet Union. The Chechen Autonomous Region was established, marking Chechnya as a country that ran itself somewhat independently of Russia, though still being under the country's control. In 1934, Chechnya was turned into the Dagestan and Ingushetia Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. Though little changed for the country, it was still ruled by the Soviet Union. That is until 1944. Sadly for Chechnya, it was no glorious fight against the Soviet Union that secured the country's independence. Instead, its freedom from Russia came at a high price of thousands of Chechen and Ingush lives. Joseph Stalin instituted mass deportations of people from both these populations, sending many to Siberia and Central Asia to work or to die. Stalin claimed the Chechens attempted to collaborate with Nazi Germany. Whatever the truth may be, the period became known as the Ardakar Genocide, with between 123,000 and 200,000 Chechens dying, up to a third of the country's population. Chechnya wasn't free, but it was turned into a shadow of its former self. Russia still controlled the territory, even through the mass deportations. But things changed in 1957, when the new Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev welcomed the deported Chechens back to their homeland and remade the Chechen-Ingush Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. The tiny country at least started to get some semblance of itself back, after nearly being destroyed by Stalin. Chechnya stayed under the Soviet yoke until the 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union, after which it almost immediately declared its independence from Russia. The Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, often known simply as Ichkeria, was founded in the same year as the Soviet Union's collapse. However, Russia would not allow Ichkeria to stay independent. In 1994, the First Chechen War began, with Russia ultimately losing. Still, the country did plenty of damage to Chechnya. Moscow sent soldiers to destroy the growing independence movement in the country, with the BBC reporting that up to 100,000 Chechens, some of them being civilians, died in a war that lasted for 20 months. Russia may not have come out on top during that war, but violence between it and Chechnya continued throughout the 90s. Though ceasefires were announced and peace treaties were signed, Chechen fighters continued to clash with their Russian captors. Ichkeria began funding and supporting Islamic terrorist groups, such as the Rayada Salikin Reconnaissance and the Special Purpose Islamic Regiment. Fighting would continue through to the late 90s and into the early 2000s. Chechnya's portrayal in the geopolitical landscape shifted during this period. No longer seen as a country fighting for its own independence, it was instead viewed as a hotbed of Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism, according to GIS reports. The perception opened the door for Russia to once again fight against and ultimately control Chechnya. It was during this time that Russian President Vladimir Putin came into the picture. After Chechnya succeeded in making itself independent in 1996, Ichkeria's chief mufti Ahmad Kadyrov found himself with internal conflict against Chechnya's Wahhabi groups. Power and political disputes began, most based on religious differences, resulting in Kadyrov waging a campaign to shut the Wahhabi groups down. Kadyrov also clashed with Chechnya's president Aslan Mashkadov during this time. Mashkadov wanted Chechnya to welcome and encourage all of its disparate social groups to grow. Kadyrov wouldn't allow this, and he didn't want to see the Wahhabis gain any more influence than they already had, so he began working with Russia. The Second Chechen War officially began in August 1999, with Kadyrov playing a huge role. He destroyed Wahhabi rule in northern Chechnya, providing Russia with a pathway into the country. He also encouraged his fellow Chechens not to fight against the invading Russians. Vladimir Putin had become Russia's prime minister by this point, and was preparing to assume power as the country's president. The Second Chechen War gave him the perfect opportunity to strengthen his authority and build his image as the strongman of Russia's political landscape. Allying with Kadyrov, Putin began a ground offensive that resulted in the country occupying most of Chechnya throughout the 2000s. Kadyrov was the ultimate victor of this conflict, at least within Chechnya. His alliance with Putin had seen Russia's president promise that Moscow would finance Chechnya's budget while guaranteeing Kadyrov's power, all in return for Kadyrov maintaining stability in the region. In other words, if Kadyrov did what Russia wanted, he would stay in power. Except it didn't work out that way. Ahmad Kadyrov became president of the Chechen Republic in October 2003, while the Second Chechen War was still ongoing and large-scale military operations were winding down. Chechnya remained part of the Russian Federation, but on May 9, 2004, Kadyrov was assassinated during a visit to a stadium in Grozny. In the aftermath, Putin filled the power vacuum with short-lived proxies, including Alu Alkanov, until he passed the reins of Chechnya over to Ahmad Kadyrov's son, Ramzan, in 2007. Ramzan Kadyrov has led the Chechen Republic since 2007. Speaking to Times Radio, author and non-resident senior fellow of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, Diane Francis, describes Putin's actions during the Second Chechen War. There was a brutal war that Putin oversaw, she says. It involved mass bombing attacks, a sort of Ukrainian-type campaign, mass murder, civilian bombings, and all of that. This devastation of the Chechen Republic allowing Putin to exercise his control over both Kadyrovs, with Ramzan having served as a staunch ally to Putin ever since he came to power. The conversation offers more details. Due to serving as such a loyal foot soldier to Putin, Ramzan Kadyrov is both feared and venerated throughout Russia. He has actively worked to recruit volunteers from within Chechnya to fight in Putin's special military operation in Ukraine. He has also been quick to quell any hint of rebellion in his territory, as he did in October 2023 by authorizing Chechnya's police force to shoot to kill pro-Palestinian protesters in the country's streets. The great irony of this is that Kadyrov supports Palestine's cause, but the riots that resulted from these protests represented a small threat to his power. His ideals and his actions do not line up, with Kadyrov showing that maintaining his power is far more important to him than supporting causes. The takeaway from all of this is that Chechnya has a long and bloody history with Russia. It has spent most of the last 170 years under Russian rule, dealing with ethnic cleansing and multiple wars in the process. Today, Chechnya is ruled by a dictator, supported by the Kremlin, who has done an excellent job of ensuring his small country serves Russia. All seem to be going fine for Putin, but he failed to account for one thing. Not all within the Russian Federation support Ramzan Kadyrov and his regime. The Chechen warlord may have been a loyal foot soldier to Putin since 2007. However, an incident in October 2024 has led to Kadyrov swearing a blood feud against some of Putin's other allies that may lead to Russia's leader losing his grip on a country that he's controlled for most of his reign. That feud could lead to Kadyrov losing power, with those who assume his role sending a clear message to Putin, get out of Chechnya now. So what happened? On October 10, 2024, Politico reported that Kadyrov was accusing several Russian lawmakers of instigating an assassination plot against him. Those lawmakers don't come from Russia itself. Instead, they're leaders in the Ingushetia and Dagestan regions, both of which are part of the Russian Federation. Speaking to his country's security forces, Kadyrov said, "There are witnesses, people from whom they ordered the murder, asked how much they would want for an order." Kadyrov even has the names of those behind the supposed plot: State Duma deputies Bekan Barakoev and Rizvan Kurbanov, the first from Ingushetia and the second from Dagestan, stand accused in the Chechen warlord's mind. So too does a Dagestani senator named Suleiman Karimov. "If they do not prove otherwise," Kadyrov said concerning his assassination plot accusations, "I will officially declare a blood feud. This is no mere threat." In Chechnya, a blood feud is serious business, with the use of the term meaning Kadyrov is prepared to not only kill the three men he accuses of plotting against him, but their families too. This is far from the first time that Kadyrov has found himself in conflict with Dagestan and Ingushetia. NBC News says Chechnya borders both countries, with Kadyrov having previously laid claims to both as Chechen territory. Those claims haven't amounted to a war within the Russian Federation yet, but we could speculate that Kadyrov's assassination plot is merely a smokescreen, an excuse he could use to go to war against Dagestan and Ingushetia, and to claim both countries as his own and expand Chechnya right under Putin's nose. There's some good news for Putin. Kadyrov isn't attacking Russia directly. He hasn't declared a blood feud against Putin or Russia itself, but as Francis says during her interview with the Times Radio, this is another potentially big headache for Putin. Russia's leader is already embroiled in a war against Ukraine that has lasted for years when it was supposed to end in days. He's committed to that war. If fighting breaks out within the Russian Federation, he would have to deal with a difficult decision. What would he do? Attempt to broker a peace between Kadyrov and the nations that have attracted his ire, or allow his loyal foot soldier to run roughshod over two other countries that Russia controls, creating more problems that could lead to him losing control over several countries as he's trying to expand his empire? What if Putin turns against Kadyrov to maintain control over Dagestan and Ingushetia? It's a possibility, especially given that Kadyrov is suffering from a terminal illness called necrotizing pancreatitis. Chechnya's leader received the diagnosis in 2019, with Newsweek reporting in April 2024 that the condition had left Kadyrov's relatives in a depressed state. There were even rumors back in September 2023 that Kadyrov had fallen into a coma, with Newsweek reporting that his relatives believe it's impossible for him to be the same type of leader he's always been. There won't be the same leader as before, one of Kadyrov's relatives reportedly said. The new implications will seriously affect him. Even if he recovers now, he will neither be alive nor dead. Today it's obvious that that turned out to be incorrect. Kadyrov is still alive and he's capable of making threats of blood feuds against his rivals. But the problem these health issues raise for Putin is that the loss of Kadyrov opens the door for other Chechens to attempt to exert control over their country. That wouldn't be a problem if Russia wasn't in the midst of a war with Ukraine. Putin could focus on installing a new leader who is as sympathetic to his causes as Kadyrov has always been. But Russia's leader's attention is diverted. So Putin faces a massive problem. Not only is he having to deal with Kadyrov making threats against other members of the Russian Federation, creating the risk of a war breaking out within his own empire, but he has the headache of civil conflict in Chechnya to handle. If and when Kadyrov passes away, others will try to fill the power vacuum he leaves behind. There are already Chechens who want to see their country become independent from Russia once again. Some are even fighting against Russia in Ukraine. NPR reported on at least one Chechen battalion of several hundred fighters joining Ukraine to battle Russia and the Chechens Kadyrov sent to support Putin back in September 2022. Those separatists could force their way into power if a combination of Kadyrov's blood feud and ill health led to his death. They may also do the same if Putin decides to cut ties with Chechnya's leader rather than allow him to wage war against Dagestan and Ingushetia. Again, another problem emerges for Putin. Without Kadyrov, Russia's leader faces the prospect of losing his grip on Chechnya. Groups fighting for independence could gain more power, and if they do, they'll send a clear message to Putin: we want you out of Chechnya. So we come to the most important question we'll ask in this video. What does Kadyrov's blood feud declaration really mean for Putin? Diane Francis has some thoughts. She says Kadyrov's blood feud has resulted in him picking fights with other ethnic minorities inside his country, but that came from other republics with different ethnic groups in the northern Caucasus region that's part of the Russian Federation. Francis believes that leaves Putin staring down the possibility of a mini-civil war inside Chechnya. Worse yet for Putin, the blood feud could spark the consolidation of other ethnic groups who, unlike Kadyrov, don't benefit from Russia. That's a key point. Kadyrov's allegiance to Putin has allowed Chechnya's leader to maintain full control over his country. That's not been the case for many other ethnic groups that fall under Putin's control. Putin has focused on recruiting such minority groups to his military in his fight against Ukraine. The Moscow Times reported in February 2024 that these groups suffer outsized fatalities compared to Russia's Slavic groups. The problem is so severe that it threatens to destroy entire countries as they lose thousands of men. Maria Vyashkova, who is a Buryat scientist based in the United States, lays the problem out clearly. The most dire situation is with indigenous, small-numbered peoples of the north who should be legally exempt from military service altogether. Those people are dying in the trenches of Ukraine. In one generation, these nations will simply disappear. What does that have to do with Kadyrov's blood feud declaration? Francis said Kadyrov's rash actions may be the beginning of an underground movement among some of the Turkic counties in the southwestern portion of the Russian Federation. Such countries are typically secularly Muslim and descend from Central Asia. Their issues with Chechnya, combined with the problems Russia's northern region countries have with Putin using their people disproportionately in his special military operation, could spark a civil war within the Russian Federation. Worse yet for Putin, rebel factions inside Chechnya would make it much harder for Kadyrov to fight against the ethnic groups he's angered. Dagestan and Ingushetia would fight back. The repressed ethnic groups in Chechnya may rise against their Putin-sponsored leader. Russia faces a situation where its own state-led suppression of ethnic minorities may come back to bite it, all because Kadyrov has declared a blood feud over an assassination plot that may not even exist. That war could lead to the Russian-friendly leader being booted from Chechnya forever. Therein lies another problem for Putin. Chechnya under Kadyrov has been one of his biggest allies during the Ukraine war. Losing Chechnya over Kadyrov's blood feud declaration would mean losing that ally, and Putin has been relying on Chechnya throughout the war. In November 2023, Reuters reported that Kadyrov was ready to send around 3,000 of his elite fighters into Ukraine to supplement Putin's ailing forces. Those 3,000 would be on top of the 26,000 Chechnya had sent up to that point. They have the best equipment and modern weapons, Kadyrov said at the time, while pointing out that his soldiers were highly combative and very motivated to achieve results. It's worth noting that the true number of Chechen soldiers in Ukraine isn't independently verified. Plus, as mentioned earlier, some within Chechnya have even joined up with Ukraine to fight against Putin. Still, it's clear that Chechnya is a vital ally to Putin. The country may even be more important than Reuters realized. May 2024 saw the New Voice of Ukraine, or NVU, publish a piece about a British Ministry of Defense intelligence report published on X. That report claimed that Chechnya's special forces made up the main task force pushing against Ukraine on the front lines. Furthermore, fighters from Chechnya also occupy important positions in the rear lines, especially when it comes to coordinating logistics for the Russian soldiers. Kadyrov has also been key in training Russian special forces, the report claims. Around 42,000 Russians have cycled through the Russian Special Forces University based in Gudemez, Chechnya, since 2022. Granted, there are questions about the quality of that training. NVU says the Russians heading into Chechnya may only receive 10 days of instruction before being sent into Ukraine, suggesting they aren't as skilled as Russia would like the world to believe. So we see that Chechnya isn't simply supplying cannon fodder for Putin to feed his meat grinder. The Chechen troops Russia's leader receives are among the country's best. They're coordinating frontline assaults. They're working in the rear lines to keep equipment flowing to soldiers fighting against Ukraine. And in the Russian Special Forces University, Putin has a through line to more Special Forces fighters, albeit soldiers that may not be particularly well trained. All of that goes away if Kadyrov focuses on his blood feud. He'll naturally need to boost his own army to fight against Dagestan and Ingushetia. That could mean pulling Chechen soldiers out of Ukraine, leaving Putin's frontline forces far less organized. Those soldiers may also have to fight against rebels inside Chechnya. Should Kadyrov lose the fight or pass away due to his severe illness, the odds are that Putin loses Chechnya. Those soldiers Kadyrov withdrew would never come back, and Putin would be severely weakened as he attempts to complete his special military operation in Ukraine. And it gets worse for Russia's leader. He can likely see all of these issues coming in the wake of the blood feud declaration, but he wouldn't be able to do a thing to prevent Chechnya from ending up independent of the Russian Federation. Moscow simply can't control the conflict that Kadyrov is creating. That's according to Diane Francis. Some of the political analysts close to the Kremlin, they say that Moscow doesn't necessarily have the ability to extinguish or to control this conflict, she tells the Times Radio. And she's not wrong. Russia has already lost around 700,000 people to death or injury in Ukraine. Russia's manpower shortage is so bad that Putin is having to rely on North Korea to send troops to help him retake Kursk after Ukraine invaded the oblast in August. Putin simply doesn't have enough people to send to Chechnya and the surrounding countries to handle a civil war within the Russian Federation. Instead, he may be forced to sit back and watch, allowing the war to play out. And if Kadyrov loses, Putin potentially sees his grip on Chechnya loosen to the point where the country is ready to once again fight against Russia for independence. The most damaging thing for Putin, according to Francis, is that what's happening between Chechnya and its bordering nations is merely a microcosm of increasing anti-Russian sentiment. You're seeing more protests happen here and there, she says. Granted, Kadyrov isn't leading an anti-Putin protest. He's still a Russian ally, but what he is doing is consolidating his power in an area that's going to spark dissent and dislike from other ethnic groups, says Francis. It's a tinderbox, she adds. When Kadyrov made his blood feud declaration, he was trying to intimidate his enemies inside the Russian Federation. But what's really happened is that he's fed into a growing anti-Russia sentiment among ethnic minorities within that federation and inside Chechnya itself. The Chechen dictator, who is already in ill health, has opened up Pandora's box. Worst of all, he can't rely on Putin to come to his rescue when Russia's leader is so focused on Ukraine. Civil war is brewing inside the Russian Federation. If Putin isn't careful, that war could lead to an independent Chechnya, the loss of one of his closest allies, and more fighting against minority ethnic groups while he's trying to take Ukraine. But what do you think about Kadyrov and his blood feud? Could it lead to Chechen independence due to the enemies that Kadyrov has made? Or does Putin have more tricks up his sleeve that will allow him to maintain control inside the Russian Federation, be it directly or through proxy leaders? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching the video.